Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to my channel. So, today we're going to be talking about Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni once again. Now, the reason we're talking about them again is because the last time I talked about this entire ordeal, the focus was very much on Blake Lively's allegations. Now, I was on the train for 7 hours, so naturally I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to read the 87-page document where Justin Baldoni is suing the New York Times. And yes, that's not Blake Lively directly, but everything in the New York Times article has to do with this situation, so I figured let's discuss. Also because I hadn't really discussed Baldoni's side because we didn't really have it yet. Now we do, so we're going to hear the other side of the argument, I suppose. Let me be very clear, this is extremely messy. Some of these things, like I said, focus more on the New York Times, so it's not just Blake Lively. In the document, I'll link it down below so you can read the entire thing and go over it. These are parts that I specifically selected because I think they're the most important, the key things to be noted out of these 87 pages. That being said, obviously my opinion comes into this, so I would suggest you read all of it yourself to come to your own conclusions. Anyway, you're smart, you can figure it out. In the screenshots you'll be seeing, if it's highlighted in yellow, like the legend shows, it's me. I did the yellow highlighting. Anything that's done in red was in the screenshots in the complaint, aka not my doing.
Last thing I'm going to mention, this is not a final conclusion. This is merely hearing out the other side. I know that Blake Lively has sued, or there has been something on Blake Lively's side, and I'll get to that. This isn't the last coverage I'm doing on this, but I do want to be clear. I'm coming to conclusions with what we have as of now. That's not a final conclusion on everything. It's just, as of now, what do I think? Okay.
So, Wayfarer is the film production company. We all remember that, right? Wayfarer, its principals Baldoni and Heath, and its public relations representatives Nathan and Abel were asked to provide quote-unquote on-the-record comment and to notify the Times of any inaccuracies by noon EST the next day on December 21st, 2024, a mere 14 hours overnight. This complaint is for the New York Times, not Blake Lively directly. So, here, after they took months to write this article at the New York Times, as far as I understand, I'm pretty sure I read it, we'll cover that, they gave Baldoni 14 hours to respond, which I find so incredibly unprofessional, because with allegations like this, if you want someone to respond, first of all, you have to give them time to, and if it's 14 hours overnight when you're supposed to be sleeping, it's not really all that much time to actually respond, let alone, I don't really know who wants to think about a response right before going to bed, especially if it's this stressful. Regardless, I already found that unprofessional, and I already thought that that was a subtle way to show that the Times had already made up their mind, because if you actually wanted a response, you'd give them at least 48 hours, especially since in a response, someone might want to include, oh, I don't know, evidence? Screenshots that prove that your response is actually weighty and has significance? Anyway, later on that same page it says, Lively chose not to file a lawsuit against Baldoni, Wayfarer, or any of the plaintiffs, a choice that spared her from the scrutiny of the discovery process, including answering questions under oath and producing her communications. So, one of the main points of contention here is obviously Blake Lively lied to the Times, and the Times didn't do their due diligence, and they didn't actually research to confirm what Blake Lively was saying. So in this aspect, Lively's a liar, and the Times is lazy or wanted to push a false narrative. That is going to be a central point throughout all of this. So now you understand why the 14 hours of basically response time is even sketchier, because they didn't even check anything she said, so it's almost like they listened to what she said and were like, you're totally right, so true, sis, and then moved on and just decided to publish it without thinking of the ramifications, or, I don't know, journalistic integrity, but we all know that went out the window a while ago. That's also why there's the theory that she didn't actually turn this into a legal matter until later on, because if it turns into a legal matter, you actually have to prove that what you're saying has a leg to stand on. In her case, I'm going to tell you right now, all of this document makes her look extremely bad, and again, this is all alleged, but here, we have more proof than anything Blake Lively gave, or actually didn't give because she was believed automatically. Baldoni was supposed to have 14 hours to respond, right? He was supposed to have until noon to get back to them, to the Times. Well. Without even waiting for the response deadline of noon Eastern Standard Time on December 21st, 2024, The Times rushed to publish its inflammatory article nearly 2 hours early. If that doesn't tell you that the New York Times had already made up their mind, I don't know what will. You give someone a deadline that's not even 24 hours and you don't even wait those 14 hours they were allegedly supposed to have and then you just publish? Because to me, I'd think, with journalistic integrity, you'd keep your word, first of all, and you'd also kind of hope and wait until last minute and hope that Baldoni might give you some kind of statement or something that you can work with to show the other side of the argument. Also because the New York Times, it gives a little bit of their history in here actually. The New York Times used to be a very straightforward newspaper. They used to live with the motto of just tell it like it is. This is not telling it like it is, but on top of that, giving someone a deadline and not giving them the actual opportunity to meet that deadline is crazy. Moving on, another aspect of all of this is that there are allegedly altered text messages. So, there was a text message exchange on August 16th where Nathan forwarded a screenshot of a message from a reporter informing her, for the first time, of the Daily Mail article. In response, Nathan wrote, "Damn, this is not fair because it's also not me," followed by "everything now looks like me," conclusively refuting her involvement in the creation or dissemination of the article. So here you can see a screenshot of what is included and what isn't included. This is actually pretty important in terms of the way the public receives the information, right? Because we all know a screenshot, even slightly edited, can change everything in terms of the tone, in terms of what you're trying to say, in terms of detail. That is a massive deal. So where these screenshots are cut off or altered is significant. Apart from the fact that, are you really going to trust someone who alters screenshots? Anyway. Then it says, further evidence of the Times' complicity arises from its apparent endorsement of the criminal alteration of these text messages by Lively. Now this part was slightly funny because they tell us what emojis mean. I mean, I guess young people aren't really necessarily the target demographic of this, but apparently one of these text messages had an upside-down smiley face, which we all know what it means, but here it goes into explaining what it means because that was edited out and that changes the context, which is such a crazy thing to think about, that now emojis are part of the bigger narrative in terms of defining tone. But anyway, the upside-down smiley emoji is commonly used to convey irony, sarcasm, joking, or a sense of goofiness and silliness. So in this text message, it said, "You really outdid yourself with this," and obviously it's a sarcastic message of like, "Oh, you planted this info, good on you." And obviously if you take away the emoji, it looks like you're seriously saying, "Hey, good job on planting the info." It's a little bit scary to me that someone would edit out emojis. There's a lot about screenshots, and honestly, the screenshots, I'm gonna show you them when they're super relevant, but there are a lot of screenshots of just them sharing news articles and stuff like that, and them saying, "Who put this out there? It looks like we planted it." And within their group chat, they're like, "We didn't do this," to each other. Therefore, unless it's super concocted, they're confirming that they actually didn't plant the info, or else why would they be in the group chat being like, "What the fuck is this?" Like I said, it's linked down below, so if you want to see everything, you can check. I'll show you one screenshot of the little PR group chat they have, and it says, "God, I'm so over this. I'm sure Leslie thinks we planted this one as well." So Leslie is on Blake Lively's end. Again, this is essentially a confirmation that this is not their doing and that they weren't planting information. Actually, later on, what happens is that they think that Blake Lively's team is planting stuff against Blake Lively, but blaming the planting on Baldoni and the others. So it gets pretty meta, and it's also a little bit middle schooly if we really want to go there, but anyway. In continuation of the discussion of the Times fucking up, basically it says, "Most troubling, however, is the Times' deliberate omission of a critical player in this manufactured controversy, Stephanie Jones, once Baldoni's and Wayfair's trusted public relations representative. Jones not only had intimate access to the communications strategy and crisis management surrounding the film, but also played a pivotal role in leaking private communications cited in the article. Her betrayal, driven by a quid pro quo arrangement with Lively, appears aimed at shielding herself while aligning with Lively to curry favor and secure future opportunities." So in all of this, Stephanie Jones basically isn't to be trusted because she's kind of playing for both teams in the sense of she was on one side has exclusive information from that one side, then flipped side, and then is defending the other person while having the information from the other side. So, extremely dangerous if there is something to hide. Otherwise, extremely useful for her to be in that position because it gives her a level of authority because she worked with both, so she can claim a lot of things and be taken probably a lot more serious than the average Joe who just worked for one or the other of the two parties. Then it says, and this one isn't that big of a deal, but I did mention it in the first video, so I think it's only fair to mention it here. So remember how I said that Heath had showed Lively a video of his wife giving birth, and I said that that was like weird and creepy, also because we didn't know if he had his wife's consent? Well, on that note, the video in question was a non-pornographic recording of Heath's wife and baby during a home birth, a deeply personal one with no sexual overtone. Then it goes on to say, the video was shown to Lively as a part of a creative discussion in preparation for a birthing scene in the film. Heath informed Lively that his wife condoned his displaying the video. So that was one of my big questions, whether the wife knew about it. She did, and then the context was that there's a birth in the movie, which I didn't know about, but it makes sense in the context to give some kind of material to work with. So, less weird, still a bit weird, but less. This is a very big part because I remember this was making the headlines. So it says, adding to the sexual harassment narrative is the article's parroted accusation that both men repeatedly entered her, Blake Lively's, makeup trailer uninvited while she was undressed, including when she was breastfeeding. What Lively and the article failed to mention is that Lively invited Baldoni into her trailer while pumping to quote-unquote work out their lines. And here is a screenshot showing that. So them entering while she was doing that was not actually an overstep of boundaries because it was clear that there was no set boundary and that they could come in and that they were invited to. So again, there was a misrepresentation there, and that is a common theme here I think we've already seen. It goes on to say, the allegation that Baldoni inappropriately described Lively's character's attire as sexy is exaggerated and misleading. The text exchanges between Baldoni and Lively show that Lively had insisted that her character's clothing be much sexier. So when we're talking about sexual harassment, anything involving the word sexy obviously immediately throws up red flags because is that a crossing of boundaries? Is that harassment? In this particular case, this text message screenshot shows that actually Blake Lively used that word first and Baldoni ended up using that word to reference said conversation, right? So if I'm adjusting to what you want, if you tell me you want your wardrobe to be more off-white, I'm going to repeat the word you used and be like off-white. The same way Baldoni is repeating the word sexy because it is the word she used, and if you have a common goal, you should be using the same words, no? So, now, moving forward, it also says the article, and it's always the New York Times article, the article draws on Lively's assertion that Baldoni improvised unwanted kissing and discussed his sex life. However, both the Times and Lively intentionally exclude that Lively refused to meet with the intimacy coordinator to plan out the film's sex scenes. Now, this is a very significant part, because when we're talking about sexual harassment, words, of course, have their own weight. But when we're talking about physical action between two actors, if he did effectively improvise and grabbed her or kissed her, whatever, basically without her consent, because what's consented to is what's in the script, right? So that would have been fucked up and not okay in my books. However, to opt out of the intimacy coordinator and then come back and be like, oh, there was all this extra stuff that I didn't say okay to, well, damn, it's almost like you could have gone to the meeting with the intimacy coordinator so none of this would happen, because wow, it turns out that's the intimacy coordinator's job. So in this moment, again, it's inconsistent behavior. Also because if Baldoni was being inappropriate from the get-go, which is kind of the narrative the Times was spinning, wouldn't you be the first to want to go with the intimacy coordinator so you can put up those boundaries also in front of someone else? I'm confused. So in this screenshot, you can see that it's Baldoni talking with a female producer, and he basically tells the female producer, she doesn't want to meet the intimacy coordinator, so what are we gonna do? And even the female producer is like, just tell Blake what the intimacy coordinator says, so relay the info. So again, Blake chose to not show up to that. Moving on, Lively had made a complaint, right? So in this complaint, After the execution of the protections for return to production agreement in November 2023, because there was a writer's strike, I believe it was, so they'd halted production and then they restarted, Lively herself acknowledges that the film was completed, marketed, and released safely and successfully. That is something she said. Under duress, someone might say, yeah, everything's great, when shit actually sucked, when something uncomfortable happened. We've seen that. I think we've all done that. And normally, I would give the benefit of the doubt. And I did that before, and now I'm starting to feel stupid about it. Because here now, I'm like, okay, I feel like you're playing a game. Because everything was totally fine, and now all of a sudden it's not. All of a sudden all these allegations are coming out that nobody can corroborate and that you weren't suing over, even though you could have if there was actually something to sue over. That's suspicious to me. Anyway, moving forward, it says, crucially, Lively concedes that neither Baldoni nor Heath engaged in any harassing behavior following the agreement in November 2023. Furthermore, she admits that her stated concerns were sufficiently addressed at the time. So what you're saying here is there were issues, we made an agreement, they adjusted accordingly to not continue causing those issues, so the problem was solved. So where are we now? That's my question. So you admit the problem was solved, but now you're coming back to say it actually wasn't solved? Like I said, this makes Blake Lively look fucking terrible because there is just inconsistency here. I haven't seen one consistent thing as of now. So, as I mentioned prior, I said that Blake Lively took on a role in this project that she didn't have. She wanted to edit the film, she wanted to see the cuts, she wanted to take a part in the production that was not her role. And she strong-armed her way into it, and we'll get into that a little later, and Ryan Reynolds, he looks terrible here too. Doesn't surprise me, never liked that man. Anyway, here you can see a screenshot between Justin Baldoni and an editor. So it says, just curious if you guys have peeked at her cut and if anything has changed. Editor 2 says, I've just been told that we are not permitted to look. Baldoni says, haha, wow, when did that happen? As per Sony this evening through someone. Justin Baldoni says, wow, okay then, the editors and director aren't allowed to look at an actress's cut. Got it. Well, here we go. We will keep taking the high road. So, honestly, I'd probably fight someone if I were in the position of director and editor and I can't see the cut. Truly gobsmacking. Honestly, I don't even know what to say. The fact that they let her do that, and this is going to be a common theme, they let her get away with so much shit because, first of all, she threatened them, basically blackmailed. She said she was going to come forward about shit that didn't happen, so make of that what you will. But she threatened them over and over and over again, and that's how she got basically everything she wanted out of them, because they kept taking the high road, allegedly. To suggest, as the Time does, that plaintiffs engaged in dark arts to destroy Lively's reputation is to ignore that Lively had long-standing reputational challenges and that plaintiffs' public relations efforts were rudimentary, above board, and entirely defensive. So this is a key point, is that in the article about Lively that I read, I'm pretty sure that they mentioned the crisis management team, and the important thing to note there is that the crisis management team in this particular case, as of this document, the crisis management was there in a defensive role. That means they are only defending themselves and not attacking Lively, which is something worth thinking about, because if any of this happened to me, to just stay and defend myself and not attack back, that takes a lot of control. Granted, they'd already spent a lot of money, so it's also not wanting to lose money. In the original article I'd read, I got mad about them dragging her reputation into it because I thought it was a low blow. And without the context, yeah, it seems like a low blow. Now that I'm thinking about it, it makes sense with everything else being mentioned. So I'll just leave that there. It says, the article entirely sidesteps the real source of conflict between Lively and plaintiffs, Lively's calculated and audacious attempt to seize control of the film. Like I said, this is a recurring theme, and over again, she forgets that she is an actress, and that is it. So, moving on, it says, notably absent from the Times narrative is Lively's insistence on obtaining editing privileges and demanding her own version of the film, a departure from industry standards. The Times' willful omission of these critical details not only distorts the truth, but also perpetuates a false narrative that conveniently absolves Lively of her own culpability in the unraveling of professional relationships and the upheaval surrounding the film. With this, I completely agree, because if you throw certain rules out the window, you don't just get to do that willy-nilly. If I throw the rules out the window, I can't really be surprised when you do the same, even though they still let her get away with it, really. So, I guess it worked for her, quote unquote. Regardless, Lively, again, was trying to be more than an actress, which is her entire job. On that note, she was obsessed with getting a producer credit. She went on and on about getting a producer credit. I don't know why, probably to set herself up for some other gig that she isn't qualified for. Regardless, it says, also missing from the article is Lively's demand for an unearned producer credit and coveted PGA mark, which is Producers Guild America, a demand that Wayfair and Baldoni were forced to concede under duress as documented internally. So when I said she really got everything she wanted, she really did. We'll get there later. So if we're really going there, this is a little story about bullying. Bullying and threatening and using leverage because you have an A-list actor husband who's gonna second you. From the very beginning, Baldoni insisted on marketing the film with a focus on domestic violence and its survivors, a message that was integral to the film's purpose. Yet, Lively drastically limited his input and deliberately steered the promotional campaign away from its societal message, further undermining Baldoni's role. Lively initially refused to permit his attendance to the film's premiere. You guys remember when Lively looked really, really dumb because at some kind of interview, I don't know, on the red carpet, she basically said, get your friends, wear your florals to a story about domestic violence, and everyone was confused because it's about domestic violence, so why are you talking about florals? Do we all remember that? So basically, Baldoni, as we see here, was insistent upon having a very consistent message that was about the deeper, more important themes of the book and then movie. She ignored all of that. And not only did she ignore that, he wasn't allowed at the premiere of his own movie, which is insane. So it goes on to say, not only had Lively stolen the film, but she had also robbed Baldoni and his team of any genuine opportunity to celebrate their hard work. We'll get more into the celebrations of their hard work in the premiere because that shit was crazy. When Wayfair and Baldoni hired Lively to appear in the film, they did not anticipate that she would execute a hostile takeover of the entire project. Lively's cynical abuse of sexual harassment allegations to assert unilateral control over every aspect of the production was both strategic and manipulative. During pre-production, Lively began to assert control over aspects of the film beyond her role as an actor and outside the scope of her contractual entitlements. Basically, the costume designers shopped for everything, they had their vision, everything was basically done in terms of wardrobe. Blake Lively just took it upon herself to be sending her ideas of what the wardrobe should be like, which is confusing because you're the actor, not the stylist. But anyway, it says, the costume designer then had to reshop her wardrobe, far exceeding the allocated budget and diverting time and resources. At one point, Lively insisted that her character, quote-unquote, had money and could afford $5,000 shoes, which had Baldoni rethinking the entire script that had been worked on for well over a year and had been approved by both studios. Everyone has their own jobs, and when you have people basically trying to co-opt your job or to take over, I just find that very frustrating, even if it's secondhand frustration like here. There's a level of entitlement that comes with that thinking of, you're not trained for this job, you've never done this job, but you're trying to take over a professional's job that they've been doing for years because you just inherently know? Like, what's that about? Obviously, you have a very inflated idea of your skill set. The fact that she even wanted to get these $5,000 shoes, that puts the budget out of whack as well, is so insane to me because this is like throwing a tantrum. This is unprofessional because really, if you're gonna be annoying and want to really contribute to the wardrobe, the least you could do is find out how much was spent on it, how much you can spend on it, or maybe just spend your own money on it if it's that deep for you, I guess. Speaking of that wardrobe, things did not go well. So it says, on the first day of principal photography, paparazzi captured and published photos of Lively in character wearing her self-selected wardrobe. To be noted, self-selected. These images were described as unflattering and sparked a backlash from the film's distributor, Sony. Baldoni received direct criticism from Sony, who voiced concerns about the impact of the photos on the film's public perception. Though wardrobe might not sound like a big deal, we have one of the film's distributors being like, hey, this is gonna fuck up the movie. That reminds me of the Justin Timberlake meme. This is gonna ruin the tour. This is actually a big deal because Blake Lively's actions are directly impacting not just the movie, potentially its success, and how the distributor feels about it, which is, needless to say, very important. But also, it's proving that she doesn't know what the fuck she's doing, and it's also proving Baldoni's point that she's getting in the way and causing, I'm not going to say strains on the relationship just yet, but problems, because obviously the distributor isn't going to be happy with you and you need that relationship. And this is the funny thing, is that she continues trying to take over roles that are not hers to take over, but she isn't capable of doing it either. So you gotta ask yourself, girl, what are you doing? Then it goes on to say, following these events, Baldoni approached Lively in her trailer to discuss necessary wardrobe adjustments. The conversation, while professional, took considerable time and was later grossly misrepresented in Lively's CRD complaint, falsely characterizing the exchange as a lengthy outburst that delayed filming and caused the crew to wait for hours while Baldoni cried in Lively's dressing room. This account, later published by The Times, is false. This may very well be where my villain origin story started. That's dramatic, I'm kidding, but this point actually makes you question what type of person Blake Lively is, and you'll see why. So there's the mention of Baldoni crying, right? Turns out that's not entirely untrue, but the reason for the crying is actually different, and it indicates the alleged possibility that Blake Lively was being manipulative as fuck. Lively here had praised Baldoni. She'd praised his work as a director and an actor, and he got emotional because he really appreciated that. Needless to say, he probably appreciated it more considering the stress he fucking put her through, that he's like, wow, this is such a nice thing to hear, blah blah blah. That's why he was crying. She misrepresented that, and that's fucked up. Especially because she misrepresented it in terms of it benefiting her, because it sounds like he basically just screamed at her and started crying randomly like he's an unstable lunatic, and that's not what happened. Lively later leveraged this conversation in support of her allegations of harassment, alleging that Baldoni made inappropriate comments about her appearance. In reality, Baldoni was relaying the distributor's concerns and the widespread social media criticism regarding the wardrobe's failure to meet audience expectations, a sentiment Baldoni shared. He was just relaying what Sony had said about the wardrobe because the public had reacted negatively to the wardrobe that Lively had shared. So what is he doing? He's sharing data. He's telling you the reactions. It's not a personal insult, and also maybe you just picked shitty wardrobe. Continuing on the saga of Lively doing things she's neither trained nor equipped to do, she starts rewriting the script, which, as an English major and as someone who wants to be a writer, I would lose my mind. I would lose my mind if a random ass actor was just like, you know what?
I'm gonna change this. Just for the vibes.
This actually would have pushed me over the edge if I'd been the writer. Oh my god. During a red carpet interview at the New York City celebrity premiere of the film, Lively stated, "The iconic rooftop scene, my husband actually wrote it. Nobody knows that, but you now." Ryan Reynolds wrote a scene. You decided to not tell anyone on, like, the cast or crew or producers or director. You decided to not tell anyone anything, including the writers. The people who actually wrote this didn't say shit to them, and then you're gonna tell someone on the red carpet that your A-list husband randomly just felt like he had the authority to do that. Worst of all, I feel so terrible for the screenwriter, because the screenwriter was interviewed and obviously didn't know, because again, nobody was fucking notified, and he had to react graciously, being like, oh, that's nice. I would have burned a house down. One super essential part of all of this was the alleged body shaming of Lively. Remember how she said that Baldoni had talked to her trainer and asked the trainer to make her lose weight? That was the narrative that was going around. Well, it turns out that's not it at all. At all. But it's so easy to say body shaming these days and everyone goes with it. And unfortunately, I went with it because it seemed believable at the time. No. Incorrect. That is not what happened, according to this, anyway. Baldoni, while training for a physically demanding scene in which his character, Ryle, would lift Lily, asked his trainer, who was introduced to him by Lively and oversaw his training for the film, how much Lively weighed. Baldoni, who suffers from back issues and has multiple bulging discs, made the inquiry to ensure he could safely perform the lift without injury. Unfortunately, the trainer relayed this information to Lively, who then informed Reynolds. The confrontation that followed was so aggressive that Baldoni felt compelled to offer repeated apologies despite his question being entirely reasonable and made in good faith. Following this incident, Lively refused to perform the lift scene, even though it had already been rehearsed with a stunt double. Listen, we're all different about things like weight, I'm different about it than, I guess, the average Joe because of an eating disorder. We all carry our experiences, okay? But someone asking what your weight is to make sure that they don't hurt their back because they have back problems is not about you. It's absolutely not about you. And he hired a stunt double so everything could be done properly. Also for your own safety, because mind you, if he can't lift you and it fucks up his back in the moment, who do you think he's going to be dropping? You. So it's a double win in the sense of, I'm assuming you don't want someone to be injured because of you, and you also don't want to be injured. So what are we really crying about? I feel like this is making me a lot harsher, but truly a lot of this is really stupid shit. Actually very silly shit that any adult would get over. Based on everything we've seen so far, it seems like Lively had her eye on Baldoni in a very particular way. So it says, over the months leading up to the film's release, Lively and her collaborators consistently scrutinized interactions with Baldoni and employed tactics that fall squarely within the definition of gaslighting. This behavior pressured Sony, Baldoni, and Wayfair into ceding control to Lively at every turn, resulting in her domination of nearly every aspect of the film's production. And that is a great summary for how most things ended up happening here. So, it says, for example, Lively demanded that an intimacy coordinator be present at all times when Lively was on set. In fact, an intimacy coordinator had already been engaged during the first half of production, so Wayfair took no issue with the request. Contrary to Lively's assertion, it was she who refused to meet with the intimacy coordinator to plan out scenes, putting Baldoni in the awkward position of meeting with the intimacy coordinator alone and later relaying sex scene suggestions to Lively in the intimacy coordinator's absence, not only defeating the purpose but resulting in accusations by the Times that before shooting began, Baldoni wanted to add sex scenes that Lively considered gratuitous. In fact, these scenes were prompted by the intimacy coordinator. I do think we should generally make a rule, and I'm not saying this in a facetious way, we should make a rule that it is mandatory that you see the intimacy coordinator, because otherwise it's way too easy and convenient to be like, this wasn't in the script, we never talked about this. And it's like, well, you didn't go to the meeting. So someone's telling you what happened in the meeting, and you can choose to not believe them, or you can just choose to show up because, oh right, it's part of your job. And I think that's what's so frustrating here, is that Blake Lively seems to want to put on the hats of all these other jobs and not her own. Worry about the acting. Trust you have a lot to worry about with just that. So remember how Lively used the word sexy to make the wardrobe sexier? So returning to that, it says, Lively established what language is acceptable to her and what is not, at the very outset of the relationship, just 2 days into filming. To use this language herself, then, in turn, make a note of each instance when her director used the same language, also to describe wardrobe and character, is at best a double standard. And it's true, because we return to what I said before. If you use a specific word, and that's what your vision is, I will also use that specific word to let you know I understand that's what your vision is. So, for her to be able to say sexy, and he can't, I'm sorry, that's delusional. So, this is where Ryan Reynolds turns into a bad guy, or if you're me, proves you right. It was agreed that filming would resume on January 5th, 2024. They arrived eager to discuss plans for the next day's filming, prepared with their production materials. Instead, they were blindsided by Lively and Reynolds, who presented a list of grievances that were both unanticipated and troubling. Reynolds launched into a tirade, berating Baldoni in what Baldoni later described as a traumatic encounter, stating he had never been spoken to like that in his life. Reynolds demanded an apology to Lively for actions that were mischaracterized and demonstrably false. When Baldoni resisted apologies for what he had not done, Reynolds became further enraged. Everyone, including the producer Lively had asked production to engage, and a representative of Sony that was in attendance, left that meeting in shock. The producer offered that in his 40-year career, he'd never seen anyone speak to someone like that in a meeting. The Sony representative mentioned that she would often think of that meeting, and her one regret is that she didn't stop Reynolds' berating of Baldoni. Let's look at this for a second. You get accused of a bunch of things you allegedly didn't do, like the body shaming. Then you go to the actress's house with her A-list celebrity husband, and he tears you a new one in a way that no one's ever torn you a new one before, in a way that even people around you have difficulty conceiving of, and you're the bad guy? In this particular situation, and in a lot of other situations, an issue I have with actors and other people of the sort is this exact behavior. The thinking that because you're famous and rich enough, you're gonna get away with some crazy shit that otherwise would not fly. And I think the crazier part too is doing this seemingly without the fear of any type of repercussion, which scares me even more, because I'm like, Have you gotten away with this before? Or why did you think you were going to get away with this at all? If that doesn't make you rethink slightly Ryan Reynolds if you believe this complaint. So already after this meeting, things feel fucked up because you're being talked to in a way that is not appropriate. You don't really know what to do. You've given this actress so many passes to do whatever she wants, even though in no other world would that fly? So this is what happens. Faced with mounting pressure and weighing the financial implications of what shutting down a film halfway through production would mean, Wayfarer made the difficult decision to resume production and finish the film despite fears that Lively was intentionally manipulating facts for her own gain. The stakes were extraordinarily high. Financiers had invested substantial resources, hundreds of cast and crew members had endured months without work due to the strikes, and nearly 5 years of development had gone into bringing this film to life. This is the point where I think shit gets really fucking sad, because realistically, it's very obvious that the plug would have been pulled so long ago at this point of the narrative, but because so much money had been spent, because you were being backed, also because you don't want to sever a rapport, right? Like, imagine you're working with Sony and all of a sudden you're like, haha, not doing that. Do you really think Sony's going to want to work with you again? Not likely. So the cost of working with Blake Lively was not only giving into humiliation, giving into manipulation, gaslighting, whatever, it was also giving into behavior like this in order to save the film. This is where we see Lively continuing to step out of her role as actress and take on the role of editor or whatever else she felt like that given hour. This is going to be a big chunk of text, apologies, but you need this context. Lively requested to join Baldoni in the editing bay. As a seasoned professional with over 20 years of experience in the entertainment industry and having grown up in a family deeply involved in the field, Lively was fully aware of the implications of her request. In fact, her request explicitly acknowledged that it infringed upon Baldoni's protected period. So basically, in terms of editing, there's a protected period of, I believe it is 10 days, where Baldoni would have the opportunity to, as it says here, immerse himself in the creative craft, free from external influences. So this is basically, like with writing, an editing period where you cannot be interrupted or influenced by outside sources. This is solo time, basically, and it's supposed to be sacred in the filmmaking industry. Nonetheless, in the aftermath of the serious false allegations she had leveled against the production, Baldoni, Wayfarer, and Sony reluctantly agreed to grant her access to the editing bay for 2 days. Remember the number 2. 2 days. Notably, despite her allegations that Baldoni made her uncomfortable, Lively sought to spend prolonged, close time with him in the confined and collaborative space of the editing bay. So this is another point of inconsistency, because if someone is essentially a POS and they're harassing you, if that's the case, would you sign up to be alone with them in a room? Because that sounds nightmarish to me. So there's a question of, okay, maybe allegedly things happened after, though really now I don't have any reason to give her the benefit of the doubt. But she chose to be alone with him in a confined space. What began as a 2-day collaboration extended into 10 days, during which Lively sought to work alone in the editing bay without Baldoni. Despite Baldoni incorporating 7 pages of her notes into his own edit at the very onset and consistently keeping her involved in every subsequent edit, Lively expressed dissatisfaction with mere collaboration, asserting that she too deserved the opportunity to see her creative vision realized. She requested exclusive time with the editors. In response, Wayfarer flew Baldoni's editor to New York to assist Lively in the process. Eventually, Lively fired the film's editors, replacing them with her own choice, specifically an editor often used by Reynolds. She also fired the film's award-winning composer, replacing him with composers from Reynolds' recent project. Against repeated objections, Lively created her own cut of the film at Wayfarer/Sony's expense. Sony later informed Wayfarer that Lively would not promote the film unless her demands were met. I'm really trying to give benefit of the doubt, but all of this to me is almost unbelievable. The fact that an actor would feel so full of themselves as to think that they are equipped to do all of this is insanity to me. I don't know how one reaches that level of delusion, and if she weren't doing it in such a manipulative way and fucking everything up, it would almost be impressive, but this is truly, I don't even know, gobsmacked. That is the theme word for all of this. The fact that she fired the editors and composer and just happened coincidentally to choose people that had to do with Ryan Reynolds, Big coinkydink, huh? I find all of that insane, but the fact that they basically had to give in to everything because she kept threatening them is crazy. So then it continues. Wayfair and Sony found themselves in an unprecedented and uncomfortable predicament. Two competing versions of the film created by two different individuals, one of whom had no contractual or creative right to edit the film, let alone produce their own cut. Faced with Lively's threat to withhold promotion of the film, the studio reluctantly agreed to do an official audience test of both versions. Lively's cut and Baldoni's director cut, once again at Wayfair and Sony's expense. This decision was made with the understanding that Lively had agreed with Sony that, if Baldoni's director's cut tested higher, she would drop the matter and fully cooperate, and Baldoni could proceed finishing the film without Lively's editorial interferences. This is almost childish, truly. It's like the little kid wanting to do something they can't do, and then you have to bargain with them, so then they just let you do the thing you're trained to do. Unsurprisingly, despite Baldoni's cut scoring significantly higher with audiences and the film's target demographic, Lively reneged on her promise. She insisted that her cut be the version released to the public, even going so far as to claim that the author of the book would also refuse to promote the film if Lively's version was not chosen. Under immense pressure, Sony and Wayfair once again conceded. The fact that she brought in Colleen Hoover to all of this is an insane power play, also because what does Colleen Hoover have to lose in any of this? Honestly, like, yeah, your shitty book might have a shitty movie, but still, I feel like Hoover doesn't really have a horse in the race, truly, as much as these other two, so I think that's an insane power play. But moving on, it says, Lively later sought the coveted PGA mark on her producer credit, a certified designation licensed by the Producers Guild of America, PGA, to identify producers who have performed the majority of the producing functions on a motion picture. Neither Baldoni nor Wayfair felt Lively fulfilled the requisite criteria to earn this mark. Despite unanimous recognition of the absurdity and the unsettling nature of what appeared to be an attempt at coercion, Sony and other parties ultimately acquiesced and submitted letters of support. Imagine bullying people so fucking hard that they're gonna write a letter for you to get something you don't even deserve and that you didn't even really do. It says, eventually in the face of persistent threats levied against Wayfair and Baldoni, they were left with little choice but to draft and sign a letter on Lively's behalf. Upon doing so, Heath provided a copy of the letter to Wayfair's lawyers, accompanied by a statement indicating that they signed the letter under duress. Lively proceeded to make good on her threat. Whether or not you believe any of this, one thing that we can say that is confirmed is that they wrote this letter under duress, and there's proof of that because the lawyer has it. Just this fact alone would have me rethinking my opinion of Blake Lively. The fact that they stated in the letter that they were under duress is proof that whether you believe or not that everything else happened, there still was fucked up diva behavior in all of this. Tantrums. So this section is called Lively's Successful Bullying Tactics Result in Baldoni's Exile from His Own Film. And I think this is actually one of the saddest parts of all of this. It says, Lively instructed Sony that she and the cast would not participate in any marketing or promotion of the film alongside Baldoni. She made certain that Baldoni was removed from all artwork from the film, posters included, and stripped him of his "a film by" credit. It became clear that Lively was working diligently to contrive a narrative that would explain why she took over the film and exiled Baldoni. Baldoni had no intention of ever making this information public, ever. So the fact that he wasn't going to make this public, and that she ran to make it public after manipulating everything, I mean, Baldoni later received word that during the premiere of his movie Deadpool and Wolverine, Reynolds approached Baldoni's agent at William Morris Endeavor and demanded that the agent drop Baldoni. The wielding of power and influence became undeniable. I understand a husband standing up for his wife, but I don't think this is standing up. I think they're both being bullies. And I think that they're both actually, kind of ironically, what they're trying to say happened to them. She was making claims of sexual harassment. The harassment might not have been sexual towards Baldoni, but it was still harassment. This is harassment, in my opinion. To exile someone from their premiere, to steamroll them at every turn, trying to take over positions of power that are not for you, always leveraging a threat, you are exactly what you're saying other people are. So, Sloan is Lively's publicist, okay? So, it says, as early as August 1st, 2024, TAG, which is the PR company that works with Baldoni and the others, was made aware of Sloan planting unfavorable, false, and defamatory story about Baldoni's faith to Page 6. Sloan proceeded to feed false narratives to the Daily Mail and the New York Post containing allegations that Baldoni was a sexual predator. Sloan would also plant a false story alleging that there were multiple HR complaints during production. So now we're going into territory of not just claiming things that happened allegedly with Blake Lively, but with other people. To say that there were multiple HR complaints is a big claim to make, especially if you're saying sexual harassment and then you're like, oh, there are plenty of other claims in HR. What are people going to believe? They're going to think there are other HR claims that relate to sexual harassment as well. So really, what you're saying is he's a predator. Now we go to what I was saying initially about the New York Times. So this is a little history about the New York Times, and it's actually important that we discuss this briefly, because if this had been published in OK Magazine or Now, whatever the fuck silly gossip magazines that they sell by the register at the grocery store, if all of this were in one of those magazines, I don't think any of us would have given it a second thought, right? Even on Daily Mail, I think we all would have been relatively suspicious. But this was in the New York Times, a publication that people take seriously to a degree and shouldn't anymore. But the New York Times still wields a powerful and influential megaphone in the media and greater society. It is therefore under a solemn obligation to do the work necessary to get its reporting right. As reporters at the Times well know, getting it wrong can lead to disastrous outcomes for story subjects, including financial, professional, and reputational ruin. And New York Times sets the narrative and tone for other news organizations, amplifying the impact of its mistakes. At 10:11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on December 21st, 2024, the Times published the article. Notwithstanding that the Times was made aware of the egregiously defamatory allegations contained therein, it proceeded with publication without further inquiry. Indeed, in its rush to publish a one-sided, unsubstantiated story on behalf of Lively, the Times got it dramatically wrong. The aftershocks have been disastrous for plaintiffs, and they now, reluctantly and knowing the damage cannot be fully undone, bring suit to hold the Times accountable for its egregious misfire. So here we get a little bit more into the legalities of what the Times fucked up and what the consequences were. So it's not just, hey, you got this wrong. It's more, you got this wrong and you knew it was wrong and you still published anyway, with an air of righteousness, may I add. You still published it anyway. So that makes you morally and ethically bankrupt. I think we're past that. We already know that. We're in the home stretch, girlies. So, it says, the article also falsely portrays plaintiffs as motivated to harm Lively. As the unlawfully obtained communications demonstrate, however, that is flatly false. Plaintiffs' motivations were defensive in nature and driven by the valid concern that Lively's team had been seeding stories critical of Baldoni and Wayfair. The Times, without elaboration, dismisses this concern as baseless, treating the plaintiffs' candid private discussions, which were never intended to see the light of day, as if it were a press release. In fact, as the Times should know from the voluminous confidential communications it apparently has obtained, plaintiffs' concerns were not baseless. And I think that's something crazy as well, that the Times treated private conversations like it could be between you and your friends. Imagine those conversations being treated as if it was public information, like a press release you chose to give. I would feel so violated by that. I know that's not the main point here, but it is violating because I think there's also a level of trust with whoever you're talking to, right? Depending on who you're talking to, you're going to say different things based on the level of trust. Here, obviously, there was a level of trust high enough that you felt comfortable to write things, and those things being turned around and manipulated in order to make you look like something you're not and like you're doing something you never did. The actual malice of defendants, and each of them, is evident from their deliberate decisions to publish the article without having 1. Afforded plaintiffs a meaningful opportunity to respond, 2. Verified the authenticity, accuracy, and completeness of the communications relied upon, or 3. Ensured even a modicum of impartiality, skepticism, or even-handedness when covering highly inflammatory allegations they knew could destroy the reputation and careers of plaintiffs. And I think that that's one of the things that makes this more than just a situation between Lively, Baldoni, and the others, and more than the movie or the silly book. This is about how journalism is working right now. And if it doesn't concern you, it really should. Because these are also the people who are reporting on politics and that you're getting your information that you supposedly trust from. So if they can't report on things properly and they're okay with not reporting on things properly, that's terrifying. Journalists are our source of information for the world. So yes, this is a Hollywood story and you can be dismissive about it, even though I think it points to a larger problem. But let's think about this in the big picture. If journalists don't even have any ethics or morals, they can just print whatever. Where are we going? We already have a problem with literacy. Imagine if journalists contribute to it by just saying random shit for the vibes. That brings us to the end of the 87 pages. You guys can let me know what you think. Honestly, now that I've seen relatively both sides, I guess, and there being significant evidence on one side as opposed to the other, I have to say, Lively is not looking good, and neither is Ryan Reynolds for that matter. Both of them actually, as of right now, with the information I have at hand, they both seem profoundly manipulative in a way that is very scary, because that's the thing about A-list actors that we've seen over and over again. It's not just manipulation, it's the feeling that you're going to get away with everything and often getting away with everything. And I think that here, what's happening and why Ryan Reynolds even stepped in is because there are people who are like, not today. And that, in turn, makes it so they need to use all the weapons A-listers have in terms of not just, their PR and whatever else, but also just in terms of the weight of their fans, which I think people tend to forget as fandoms and shit that's super silly. But realistically, that will have an impact. I don't know if Blake Lively has fans. I mean, I know that she has Amberlynn Reid as a fan, but other than that, I don't know who else actually is hardcore. But I know Ryan Reynolds does, and that power alone is very significant in terms of who people are going to believe, right? Because nobody wants to believe their fave is an asshole. So anyway, you guys can let me know what you think in the comments down below. Has your opinion changed as you saw this document, if you read it, or just based on what was in this video? Let me know. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to my patrons as always, and I'll catch you guys next time.